Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is a chart of the US dollar provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. It's a weekly chart and it is silver and the dollar overlaid. The dollar is the black candlestick chart. The silver is the blue line chart. Now this is actually a very informative chart. There's a lot of information on this chart. And just to cover some things here, first of all, we can go back to probably a key inflection point is going to be around 911. And you can see that's pretty much the top in the dollar, although we did get a drop and a rally, but then starting in about 2002 we have this precipitous decline in the dollar. As the dollar is declining, we start to get a perk up in silver, and finally by 2003 we get the breakout. And then of course silver continues to rally up until we get the Bear Stearns top. Now when we got the Bear Stearns top, there was a lot of things that happened. Of course, Bear Stearns had a couple of hedge funds that went under, and then they got folded up by the Federal Reserve and sold off to JP Morgan, and most people contend that their silver shorts were also handed over to JP Morgan. Now that coincided with a bottoming of the dollar, but it really wasn't until in the summer when the collapse really started in full force. Then of course we have this big dollar rally, and then the drop in silver all the way down to the 2008 fall low. It was at that point that silver began to rally, the dollar adjusted, and then silver continued, and we get the dollar trying to make a new low down around 2010. But then we get in late 2010, this point right here marks QE2, and you can see when QE2 happened, the dollar began to tank again, and silver just took off to the upside. So silver rallied continuously from that point, a ferocious rally from roughly $17 or $18 all the way up to 50. And then of course we got the May smackdown, and this was the May smackdown where we get on one weekend we get a capture of bin Laden, a release of the Obama birth certificate, and we get 5 consecutive margin increases in silver. And that of course not only marks the top for silver, but also marks the bottom for the dollar. So now we're coming up to today, and you can see we're kind of imitating in a much larger way this formation that we had back in 2008. The question is, can they bring silver down and the dollar up to meet and cross like they did? And it's starting to look like they can't. You can see the trend line I've drawn on the dollar. The dollar is starting to turn down here. The MACD is starting to turn down. You can see on silver the trend line I've drawn up. Silver is starting to turn up, and the MACD is not on this chart, but the MACD is turning up as well. So it's if you look in the past, you can see that the size of the silver bursts are getting larger, and it looks like the ability to bring them back down to touch probably is going to fail this time. Now if we get that, if that happens, we may be looking at something like this, where they diverge, and they diverge from very distant points here, and the dollar collapses and goes down and tests new lows, and of course silver is going to rise and test new highs. So that's a chart you can stare at for a long time. Now you have to remember, of course, that the dollar is a basket of currencies, and this is silver versus the dollar. So there's a lot of factors there. It's certainly not conclusive, but it's definitely informative. Now, to the story that we covered last night, that was the breaking story, of course, with FT and CNBC covering FT, and then we had this announcement by Silver Doctors, which is kind of interesting on its face here, because we have silver doctors. Apparently, from reading this, it looks like silver doctors made a phone call to Bart Chilton. It says, as I'm sure you're aware, FT Tonight reported that the CFTC will be dropping its 4-year investigation into silver manipulation, etc. And then we have the statements by Commissioner Chilton. I don't know if this was a poor editing job or if this is actually what he said, but there's some strange things here, so I'll go ahead and read it. Supposedly, Chilton commented, quote, there has been no such decision. I've been on the blower with some reporters saying what I can about the inaccuracies. Hopefully, there will be a story or two that contains some of this. In general, what I said is this: the Financial Times report related to silver is not only premature but inaccurate in several respects. Whenever the CFTC does take an action or actions related to our silver investigation, I'm hopeful that we will do so in a fulsome, I don't know if that's the word, I don't know what that means, and transparent manner. That will certainly be my desire in anything we do. I continue to believe, consistent with my previous statements to which you referred and based upon information from the public, that there have been devious efforts related to moving the price of silver. Incidentally, I also believe that there have been silver and gold market anomalies outside of the Silver Investigate window that have raised and continue to raise market concerns. Perhaps, though, there will be more coverage on this matter soon. So I definitely have to say I don't know what this means. I think the most important thing about this is that this story that was broken by Silver Doctors, you can see down here, we've got 28 responses, and I'll link this below. You can read the responses. And so that's, in my mind, that's the most interesting thing about this, is that we have 28 responses. So we have this huge news story that breaks. We have a scoop from Silver Doctors that night, supposedly from Bart Chilton. I have no reason to doubt that Silver Doctors isn't telling the truth. It seems kind of surprising. And then only 28 responses. So how many people are actually following this story? How many people are in the silver game? From this, I have to conclude that it's just such a small number of people that it's negligible. So how many people actually follow silver right now? It seems like it's just a tiny number, and of course there's going to be a much larger number in the future. And if these market moves are any indication, just based on the tiny number that are following silver currently, if even 10 times that amount, which is basically 10 times a tiny fraction, is still a tiny fraction, what kind of moves will we see in silver? It's just such a small market still to this day, even with all this going on. I can't imagine what the moves are going to be. So that's that story. Now I want to jump over to the question of the night, and this is by CHC. Silver control by the rich and powerful. Dear Brother John, I've been seriously researching the financial and political problems with America and the world for the last year now. Wow, it's pretty mind-blowing and sometimes hard to believe, but the evidence is all there. Naturally, I've been preparing, and silver is part of that, which naturally has brought me around to listening to you. Your YouTube videos have been very informative and are a good source to put me into other associated subjects. I have a small radio show in Colorado, though I've been trying to inform the public sheeple as to what's happening. It's not an easy task, but has brought me into contact with many skilled and interesting people. This problem is deep and wide. One of these people that I talked to is Walter Burian. See links attached. He's a very interesting person who is very knowledgeable on derivatives. He talks about CAFR funds. You should look into it. What I've found interesting with regard to your favorite subject, silver, is that he feels this will fail as well, as when the timing is right, the rich and powerful will control the metals markets and get in and out before the common man can make a buck on his purchases. The common man cannot win. Comments. Well, I've seen some of the comments that Walter Burian has made, and I certainly don't consider him to be an expert on silver. I give him full credit for exposing CAFR And I've covered CAFR, actually probably 5 or so episodes on that subject. I have a little bit of a different take on the CAFR, and my take is that the trillions of dollars that are in the CAFR are, in my mind, something similar to the trillions of dollars that are in 401ks and a lot of these other investment accounts. And in my mind, they're pretty much just trap funds. As I mentioned yesterday, the game of musical chairs that they're playing with the paper market is similar with the other investment markets, the stocks and bonds. There's just so many people who have bet their future on these markets, and we're going to see when I look at the national debt clock how those numbers are going to change in the future. But there's such a large number of people who have made bets on the future of these markets that it's dangerous for any large group of people to bolt for the door, because if they do, then it's just going to cause a cascading selling of these funds, and that's going to make them all worthless. So my big criticism of CAFR is that these are trap funds, and that it's not that the governments are broke. They certainly do have trillions in these CAFRs. The problem is that none of them can liquidate these funds because they're various stocks and bonds, and if any of them blink first, then it's going to bring the whole game down, and they're all going to find out that their projections were even worse than what we're seeing. So it's my contention that the reason why the CAFR funds aren't mentioned and the reason why the CAFR funds aren't sold to meet these budget deficits is that the people who hold these are worried about causing a cascading selling effect in the stocks and bonds that they hold, and it's an enormous number. It's been estimated as high as 50% of the stock and bond markets are held by these government funds, and of course, if they sell them, who are they going to sell them to? So that's the big worry with the CAFR. I don't think that Walter Burian is correct about silver, and obviously I don't believe that the powers that be, and that's the other part of this question, that the powers that be are in complete control. Now, if I believed that the powers that be were in complete control, then I wouldn't be talking about a lot of things that I talk about, and I think the world would be a lot different place. I believe that the powers that be don't control as much as they'd like to control, and certainly markets are something that they don't control. And as long as we have nation states and relatively free markets, although the markets are becoming less and less free, but as long as we have nation states where people can choose to invest their money, then the power and control of the elite isn't as much as they'd like it to be. And I certainly believe that there are factions. Now, I don't want to get into any kind of tinfoil hat analysis, and I'm sent articles all the time regarding all of these supposed conspiracies, anywhere from the funds supposedly from the gentleman, I can't remember his name now, supposedly trillions of dollars that are going to be freed up. And of course there's the Benjamin Fulford theories that the Asian White Dragon Society is going to bring down the Western Illuminati, and then there's Lyndon LaRouche, and there's no end to the conspiracy theories. But I do believe, even though I don't know the facts for sure, I do believe that there are factions in the powers that be, and there are contending factions, something like Bixweir contends, although I'm certainly not convinced that Bixweir is right as well. But I do believe that there are contending factions, and that those factions are battling for control of world markets, and they're certainly battling for control over what the fate of the New World Order will be, whether that will be a US-centric type of world thing, or whether we're going to pull back into a more diversified control. I really don't know the answer to that, except that I do believe there are factions. Now, on to the last topic of the night, and that's going to be the national debt clock. And that's something that I saw on Zero Hedge, so credit to Tyler Durden for finding that. And the thing that you have on the national debt clock when you go there is you have this debt clock time machine. And that was actually something I was going to do anyway, but Tyler Durden did it first, so I'm going to go ahead and do some comparisons here. So what you can do is you can click on the link, and you have the ability to jump ahead to 2016. Now, what this clock does is it takes the current rate. What the time machine does is it takes the current rate and extrapolates out based strictly upon these numbers ticking here. So, and what I hope to show you here is that that can't be accurate. So, the big numbers, of course, that everybody is looking at is the U.S. national debt. You can see currently the debt clock is showing us at about $15.9 trillion. If you do the jump to 2016, you can see we jumped to about 22 trillion. So some of the other numbers you want to look at is federal spending jumps from 3.6 trillion to 4.7 trillion. You can see the deficit jumps from 1.26 trillion to down to 1 trillion. And but those aren't the real shockers. The ones that I wanted to point out that are the real shockers are how they come to these numbers. And these are the green numbers over here. So you can see that U.S. federal tax revenue is currently 2.3 trillion. The income tax brings in about 1.1 trillion, and the payroll tax brings in about 842 billion, and then we've got about 2 billion in corporate tax. And what is so shocking is when you jump to the 2016, based on this current rate, you can see that U.S. federal tax revenue jumps from 2.3 trillion to 3.9 trillion. So we're talking a projection of nearly doubling federal tax revenues. Now when we get to the breakdown, we can see that income tax is about 1.1 trillion and a projection of 2.7 trillion. So we're talking about a 250+% increase in income tax revenues. Of course, the payroll tax is going to stay about the same. And then the other shocker is the corporate tax that we're looking at 213 billion increasing to 608 billion. So we're talking about a tripling of the corporate tax and a near tripling of the income tax. And the big question, of course, is going to be, how is it possible that we're going to get a near tripling in these tax revenues? Is this clock projecting an Obama victory? And if that Obama victory occurs, are we going to have a massive increase in income taxes? Are we going to have a massive increase in corporate taxes to the point where we will have nearly triple the revenues by 2016? So obviously, if we use a more realistic scenario, such as state revenues, if you look at your state revenues, you go from 1.5 trillion to 1.7 trillion. So if we increase federal revenues by that amount, then obviously these federal revenues are going to increase by that amount, and they're really only going to go up to about 2.9 or so. So we're off by about $1 trillion there. You're going to have to add about $1 trillion there. So you're going to be talking about a $2 trillion budget deficit, and you're only going to be talking about a little bit over $2 trillion in federal tax revenues. So clearly, just by going by the national debt clock and the current rate of change on that clock, this path is unsustainable. The projection that revenues are going to increase anywhere like this is absurd. We know, as I mentioned in recent videos, that people react to tax increases, that there are unforeseen consequences to raising taxes, and that's that people pull back and they change their habits. A large number of people go galt and simply shut down. They close their business. They live on less. They leave the country. They retire. So these projections are in no way even realistic, and something's got to change. Something's got to break. And this is pretty clear that we're heading to that point very quickly, and it possibly might be right after the election. So back to silver, we are projecting a bottom in silver and in gold and a potential top in the dollar. And if we get that, if we actually get a serious downdraft in the dollar, such as this or this or this or even this, then we may be looking at an explosive rally in silver going the other way. And we'll talk to you next time.